So this is going to be part one of a two-part video series, and the first part is going to be how to create essentially your first orchestration and what you need to look for and do. And part two of the video is going to be how to troubleshoot your orchestration if things don't work out. So what we're going to do in this video is start out by just creating a real basic, simple application that's going to demonstrate uh, two web services. Both of them are SBM web services. One of them is a method called get version, and the other one's going to be a transition item, which is basically how to update an item. So let's get the application created here first. When this opens up here. Okay, so we'll just create a blank application. We'll call it first orchestration. Alright, and fill in the rest of this. Let's call it first orc. And what we're going to do first is go to the data design, and we're going to make sure we add the description field. And click on the table. So by default, the description field isn't in a new application. So we will put that in here. We'll use that later. And then we'll just add our own custom text field as well. We'll just call it custom field. Okay, so make note of this. We're going to use this here in a minute, but the name of this field, the database field we're going to use, is called custom_field. You'll see where that comes into play in a minute. Okay, so now, in order to make the orchestration part of things, we'll click on the workflow design, and we'll click on the workflow itself, and we're going to make a asynchronous orchestration happen as soon as somebody submits an item. So we click on the submit transition, we'll go down to actions and click new, and these are the available actions for this transition. So we're just going to keep it real simple. It's going to be a orchestration workflow, and by default they're asynchronous, which means that happens in the background. So if you do a submit, the submit will happen, the formal will switch really quick, but the asynchronous orchestration happens in the background, and that'll be evident here in a second when we run it. And then just using local event is fine. Okay, so don't really need to change anything here. It's going to affect this item, and just unconditionally, just whenever that thing is submitted. So this part right now we don't have any orchestration workflows, so we just click new and create a new one. We'll just call it my orchestration. Alright, and so what that does is, you'll notice right here, it created this orchestration for you called submit. It just basically uses the transition name. You can change it later if you want. So now with that done, all that's going to happen is when somebody submits something, it's going to run this orchestration. So now if we click on the orchestration workflow, right now there's nothing in the workflow whatsoever. And this is the point where you can use the two built-in web services that SBM comes with, or you can then add your own web services to your orchestration. So in keeping it simple, we'll just use the app services webflow by dragging it onto the workflow here, and the method that gets shown first is logout. So what we're going to do is simply drop this down, and there's a real simple one that you can run called get version. Get version basically has no inputs and just returns the version of SBM that you're running, and it doesn't require a username or a password. So it's a real simple one to play with and test with. So you could rename these to whatever you wanted to. We'll just call it get version here, and keeps it cleaner. Alright, so then we're going to drop another one on to our workflow. And so what this one's going to do is we'll use one called transition item. Transition item is what you would use when you want to update an item. So it basically runs a transition, and the default transition that it runs is the update transition. So that'll come into play here in a second. So like I said, with get version, you don't map, there's no mappings or anything, it's just a get. So what we're going to do is use the version that comes from get version, and we're going to update something in this item. All right. So in keeping it very simple, we will click on the data mapping. All right. And by default, internal SBM web services such as these two or any of the methods in these two, they use SSO or single sign-on, Serena single sign-on, regardless of if you have it turned on or not. So there's no need to fill in the authority. Okay, so this auth section we'll play with a little bit in part 2 of this video in troubleshooting. So what you need to do is tell this transition item method which item you want to update, and by doing that, you drill down into the item option, and then here you have this one called table ID, item ID. So if we drop down, and the inputs coming into this web service orchestration, you could drill into the event notice, and then down under extension, there's one in here called item ID, table ID. Basically, when somebody hits submit, it's going to submit this as an input. So we'll map the item ID. That tells transition item which item you're going to update. And now you have to drill down into the item itself and tell it what fields to update. So we're going to keep it real simple, and the one that's just built in as soon as you add it to the table is description. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop it down, and you'll see that the return value from get version sits here, and that's all it's called, is return. So let's map return to the description field. Okay, and then the other one that's a little more advanced is our custom field. You'll notice down here under extended field that there is no plus sign next to it. So based on that, you're going to have to define which fields, which custom fields that you want to update values for. So what you do is you right click on extended field, and you click the option that says add array record. So we're going to add this array record, and in this array record we have to tell it an ID. So this is the ID of the field that you're going to update. So right now you've got these 4 choices to pick from. The easiest one is DB name. So we use DB name. I told you to take a note of it a minute ago. And if you type in custom underscore field, which is the name of our custom field that we created, that's how you do. That's how you tell it which field you're going to update. Then you have to tell it what value you want to update. And again, on the value area down here, you have to right click, say add array record, and then you have to tell it what value you're going to update. And there's a few different ones you can choose from depending on what you're doing. But what we want to do is internal value. So we're going to change the internal value of the custom field, and we're going to map it to the return value from get version. So it's exactly like description, but it's a little longer because you have to go through this other few steps of adding your extended field. So now if you shrink this up, you'll notice that extended field, there's 1 record. So if you were to add another custom field, you had another field that you had created, you have to right click on here again and go through that process again. So for every record custom field that you want to update, you have to add an array record for it. So that's how the web service knows what to update. So again, that looks like this. When you're done, you're going to be DB name of custom field, and then you have to tell it what value you want to update. Okay, so that is all there is to our web service. Let's deploy this now, and I'll pause this and come back in a second. Okay, our app has now been deployed, and you'll notice it says completed. So if we log into the UI itself, we'll come to our app that we created here. It's called First Orc. And if I submit an item into this application, we'll just call it test1. And you'll notice that our description field is empty, and here's our custom field is also empty. So when I hit OK, you'll notice that right now the description and custom fields are empty still. They're empty because this is a asynchronous orchestration, which means it's happening in the background, and when it's done it'll update the item. If this was a synchronous item, orchestration, I mean, these description and custom fields would have to wait for the orchestration to finish, and the value would just be here. So now if we hit this the refresh button, our description and custom field should fill in. So what that did again was ran get version. Get version came back with a value. The next transition, or the next web service in our orchestration workflow, was transition item, which did an update and updated both of these fields with the values. And down at the change history, you can actually see it happening. I did a submit, and then the update happened, which was the transition item. And basically that's it. That's your first orchestration. And part 2, we're going to talk about how to troubleshoot orchestrations and how to get some logging. So hopefully that helps, and tune in for part 2.